I'm back with Jeh Johnson, who ran the Department of Homeland Security under President Obama. Good evening. Thanks for coming on The Beat.
Ari, this is my first time here. I was brought here on false pretenses. I was promised a fallback Friday, but I'll get over that.
We brought you on a Friday, and I promised to get you in a fallback.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
And I will.
Anyway.
Promise coming in the future.
We're here for a serious discussion.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. On the serious side, what does it mean when you see this language and rhetoric hit policy and people around Trump say we should go back from before 65 when you literally had bigoted laws?
Ari, I used to tell audiences when I was in office, those who know history learn from it. Those who don't know the mistakes of history are bound to repeat them. 70 years ago yesterday, my own grandfather, who was a sociologist, wrote a lot about civil rights in the 1940s and 50s, gave testimony before Congress 70 years ago yesterday. And it was before the House Un-American Activities Committee. You know, there's been discussion this week about if you object to government policy, if you complain about government policy, if you have problems with our government, you're somehow unpatriotic. And one of the first questions he was asked when he testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And this is a man who was a World War I vet, honorary degrees, had to deny that he was a communist, went on to say, wanting the elimination of inequalities and racial discrimination is not wanting to subvert the government. And that was the thread of his whole testimony. And he was a man like myself who loves this country, is a patriot, but sees the problems and wants us to address them all. And so I listened to today's debate about how if someone has a problem, if someone objects to the direction our country is going, they somehow do not love our country. And I strongly object to any notion like that.
I appreciate that. I didn't know you were bringing that, but it fits right with the discussion of how far backward we're going to go. I want to get you on the actual way this works. You're one of the best people, given the knowledge you have. What we're hearing from Republicans, and I had the border chief on last night, for example, is that basically you have to overhaul these processes. Take a look, for example, Senator Graham saying, overhaul asylum, and you won't actually have as many children waiting around. Chuck Grassley, we can put this up, says, I want to stop the separation of families at the border by repealing the 1997 Flores court decision requiring separation of families. And we'll put that up as you answer. Basically, is that true that if you made those changes, you would fix this?
First, there's a broad consensus in the American public that to do anything in this space, you should address taking care of the people who are here, the dreamers, but also secure the border. And that's kind of lost in this debate right now. The other large picture point is that to do any of those things you just said, you need Congress to change the law. And to
but
get Congress
would those things be good?
Well, yes and no. It's a little more complicated than that. The Flores decision was a settlement reached in 1997 that covered unaccompanied minors. In 2015, the judge overseeing that case determined that the settlement actually covers kids who are part of families as well. At the time, I opposed that ruling, and we argued then that it would constrain enforcement policy.
So just to be clear, you're saying on policy, some of these Republicans do have a point, that there are sort of grandfathered in restrictions that make it harder to actually be humanitarian about where to put these people.
I believe that our enforcement practices, our detention practices, which should be fair and humane, should be regulated by the executive branch, not a federal district court in Los Angeles. So there are ways to do that, but in the overheated rhetoric right now, we'll never get there.
Let me get you, before you go, on someone that you used to work with, Mr. Morgan, who I had on last night, who wouldn't say whether or not the go back statement violates DHS protocol. Take a look. Would you say that telling someone to go back where they came from violates those standards or not?
again, you have to take every situation in context. If that does happen by employee, we will investigate it, take it seriously, and we find a violation, as you suggested, we will absolutely impose appropriate disciplinary action.
Doesn't the president send the wrong message to the country and to the line agents when he engages in this kind of race baiting? And shouldn't someone in that position be able to say so?
Yes. The President of the United States is the leader. He's the leader of the country. He's the CEO of the executive branch. He has the largest microphone. He sets the agenda. And the Border Patrol is wrestling with a lot right now. They've got the crisis on the border. They're overwhelmed by the numbers. They're under stress. There were the social media messages that came to light last week, which are horribly offensive. And when you're talking about the Border Patrol, it's time now for strong leadership. And this is why having so many actings like Mark Morgan matters. If you have actings, you need people who are in Senate-confirmed positions to take a strong position.
Right.
If I were in office right now, I think I could safely say, if I had the crisis we have with the Border Patrol right now, I'd be in there saying, okay, we need to really turn this around.
Right.
And you've bottomed out, and tomorrow is the first day we begin to rebuild.
And as you say, the president's use of acting and the undermining of the authority of these positions has become quite a deliberate pattern that undercuts that. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.